Gucci Mane, he just authorized a new Pooh Shiesty album to be released, while Pooh Shiesty himself can't get a
Gucci Mane
release.
just authorized a new Pooh Shiesty album to drop, while Pooh Shiesty himself cannot get a release of his own. Gucci Mane may have just pulled off the ultimate power move in the entire rap game, and the wild part is that Pooh Shiesty handed it straight to him. Gucci Mane finessed Pooh Shiesty for his own album, and the way it went down is one of the most bizarre stories the music industry has ever produced. An artist allegedly tried to walk away from his label and ended up deeper in the machine than he ever was before, with his music still moving through the same business structure he allegedly tried to burn down. Once you understand exactly how Gucci Mane ended up with that kind of leverage, the whole situation hits different. Stay locked in, locked up. So Gucci is getting his money. Pooh Shiesty cannot get his freedom. And this is like a full 360, where we got to say call Gucci a snitch, but he is a smart snitch. Yo, what is good, fam? Welcome back. Today we are breaking down how Gucci Mane and Pooh Shiesty label relationship went from a major opportunity to a federal kidnapping case, and how Gucci Mane still ended up releasing Pooh Shiesty album through the same business structure Pooh Shiesty allegedly tried to destroy. Let us get into it. To understand how this situation even became possible, you have to go back to where the relationship between Gucci Mane and Pooh Shiesty actually started. Pooh Shiesty, born Lontrell Williams Jr., came out of Memphis, Tennessee with a sound that was raw, aggressive, and undeniably regional. He had the streets, but he needed the platform. That platform came in the form of Gucci Mane new 1017 Records. The label Gucci rebuilt after his own legal battles, and which became one of the most culturally relevant imprints in trap music. Pooh Shiesty signed to 1017 around 2021, and from that moment the infrastructure behind his career shifted completely. He had the backing of a label with Atlantic Records as a major distribution and business partner. That meant when his music dropped, it moved through a pipeline that major labels use to push their biggest artists worldwide. That kind of reach is not something a young Memphis rapper builds overnight. The music connected fast. His debut commercial project Shiesty Season dropped in February 2021 through Atlantic, and 1017 debuting at number 3 on the Billboard 200. Collaborations with Lil Durk, Gucci Mane, Big 30, and 21 Savage helped establish him as one of the leading voices out of Memphis. But by the end of that same year, Pooh Shiesty was back in a federal courtroom on firearm conspiracy charges out of Florida. He ended up serving more than 3 years of a 5-year sentence before being released in October 2025. During that time away, his music kept moving on its own. Shiesty Season kept growing. Streaming numbers stayed alive, and when he came home in October 2025, he dropped a single called F-Do, which stands for First Day Out, and it hit number 12 on the Hot 100, his highest charting solo record ever. For a moment, it looked like Pooh Shiesty was positioned for the biggest run of his career. The demand was real, and the timing was right. But here is the thing about coming home after that much time away. You start looking at everything differently. You see your streaming numbers and your cultural footprint, and you feel like you are bigger than the box your contract was written for back in 2021. You start doing the math on what your music is generating versus what is actually reaching your pocket. And allegedly that calculation is exactly what pushed Pooh Shiesty toward the decision that changed everything. Now before we get into it, let me keep it a buck with y'all. We are going off federal court documents and prosecutorial allegations here. Pooh Shiesty has pleaded not guilty, and his trial is set for February 2027, but the allegations are detailed. The evidence is substantial, and we need to walk through exactly what prosecutors say went down. According to the federal complaint, on January 10, 2026, 3 music industry professionals were invited to a recording studio in Dallas, Texas, for what they believed was a legitimate business meeting to discuss the terms of Pooh Shiesty recording contract with 1017. One of those 3 individuals, identified in court documents only as Ard, is described as the owner of 1017 Records. Multiple major outlets, including the Associated Press and CNN, identified Ard as Gucci Mane, whose legal name is Radrick Delantic Davis. So Gucci Mane and 2 associates flew to Dallas thinking they were sitting down for contract discussions. What they allegedly walked into was something entirely different. According to prosecutors, Pooh Shiesty had arranged the meeting as a setup. Once the three men were inside that recording studio, federal authorities alleged that Pooh Shiesty and 8 co-conspirators, some of whom had traveled down from Memphis specifically for this, executed what prosecutors described as a coordinated armed takeover. Pooh Shiesty allegedly asked to speak privately with Gucci Mane inside the recording booth. And once they were in there together, Pooh Shiesty allegedly produced pre-printed contract termination paperwork. This was not a spur-of-the-moment confrontation. According to prosecutors, that contract release had been printed just hours before the robbery took place. It was specific. It included demands for the immediate termination of Pooh Shiesty deal with 1017 Records, the release of all contractual obligations, full ownership of his masters and intellectual property, and the transfer of 1017 approval rights with Atlantic Records directly to Pooh Shiesty at his sole discretion. Let me break that down for y'all, because those demands tell you exactly what Pooh Shiesty allegedly believed he was owed. He was not just asking to be free of the label, he was asking for everything. The masters, the publishing, the Atlantic relationship, the creative control, every piece of the music business infrastructure that the label had built around his career. That is not a renegotiation request. That is a complete transfer of power. Gucci Mane allegedly refused to sign. And that is when, according to prosecutors, Pooh Shiesty pulled out an AK-style pistol, also described as a Draco, and pointed it at his head. Under those circumstances, Gucci Mane signed the paperwork. But here is the thing that makes this story even wilder. According to the federal filing, Pooh Shiesty was not satisfied with just a signed document. Prosecutors alleged that he then had Gucci Mane recorded on video verbally stating, and these are the words prosecutors say appear on the footage, that Pooh Shiesty was dropped from 1017. His co-defendant and fellow Memphis rapper Big 30, whose legal name is Rodney Wright Jr., allegedly filmed that video on his cell phone, while another co-defendant blocked the studio door with a firearm to prevent anyone from leaving. And while all of this was happening, the other co-conspirators were allegedly robbing the other 2 victims. The government says they took approximately $450,000 worth of items, including Gucci Mane wedding band, a watch, earrings, and cash. One of the victims was reportedly choked to near unconsciousness. Some of the stolen items allegedly ended up on social media, which eventually helped investigators piece the whole thing together. Now, this is where we got to address something that a lot of people in the comments have been calling Gucci Mane out for, and that is the fact that Gucci cooperated with federal investigators. Let us be real about what that means. The victims in this case, according to prosecutors, cooperated fully with the government. All 5 victims and witnesses gave statements. And when feds have a victim who is willing to talk, and that victim happens to be one of the most well-connected figures in Atlanta rap, with resources and legal representation, the case gets built fast and it gets built tight. Pooh Shiesty did not help himself either. He was not an ordinary free citizen at the time. He had been released from prison just months earlier in October 2025 on home confinement with an electronic ankle monitor. Federal law enforcement had GPS data placing him at that Dallas studio on January 10th. License plate readers allegedly tracked multiple suspects traveling in a convoy from Memphis to Dallas. Rental records allegedly tied one of the vehicles directly to his own father. Some of the stolen items were allegedly shown off on social media by co-defendants, which gave investigators even more to work with. By late March and early April 2026, all 9 defendants had been arrested. Federal kidnapping charges were filed in the Northern District of Texas, a charge that carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. Pooh Shiesty was ordered held without bail. The judge cited the weight of the evidence, his criminal history, and the fact that he had already violated home confinement once before. Big 30 was released on bond. Pooh Shiesty was not. And that cooperation from Gucci Mane and the other victims is a major reason why. In the streets, some people will call that snitching. In a federal courtroom, it is called being a cooperating witness. And it can be the difference between a case that gets dropped and one that puts you away for life. Pooh Shiesty allegedly walked into that studio thinking he was taking power. What he actually did was hand Gucci Mane a federal case on a silver platter. And the real kicker is what that cooperation meant for the music business side of things. Because Gucci Mane did not just come out of that studio as a crime victim. He came out holding every card in the deck. Let us talk about what that alleged forced release actually meant legally. In the music industry, a contract termination that both parties agree to voluntarily can effectively end a recording agreement. But a contract signed at gunpoint is a fundamentally different legal document. It is not a voluntary agreement. It was allegedly signed under duress, under threat of immediate physical harm. A document obtained through coercion and criminal force does not function like a valid contract modification. Legally, it can be challenged as void or voidable. And more importantly, its very existence became evidence of a crime, not a business resolution. The paperwork that Pooh Shiesty allegedly forced Gucci Mane to sign did not liberate him from 1017. It became Exhibit A in a federal criminal case against him. And that is the part that changes everything. Because if the alleged release contract is void, then the original 1017 recording agreement remains intact. Every right the label had under the original deal, every clause covering his recordings, his masters, his releases, potentially all of it stayed legally alive. The alleged forced paperwork did not erase the contract. It just made Pooh Shiesty's legal situation dramatically worse. So let us talk about how record deals actually work, because if you do not understand this structure, the financial side of this story will not hit the way it should. When an artist signs a recording contract with a label, they are entering a business arrangement that covers masters, publishing advances, and royalty splits. The label typically owns the masters on recordings made during the contract period. That is the foundation of everything. Publishing covers the underlying composition and generates separate income through streaming, radio, and licensing. Advances, the upfront money the label pays the artist, are really loans against future royalties that need to be fully paid back before the artist sees personal royalty income. Royalty rates in traditional deals are generally discussed in the 15 to 20% range of qualifying revenue after recoupment. But that number means nothing until you understand what gets deducted before it is even calculated. Streaming platforms take their cut first. Distributors take theirs. Producer points come off the artist's royalty. Management takes a percentage of the artist's income. By the time all of that is settled, the gap between what a project earns and what an artist actually receives in their pocket can be enormous. And that gap is exactly what Pooh Shiesty was allegedly feeling when he decided that a standard renegotiation was not going to be enough. Because on August 7, 2026, a 16-track Pooh Shiesty album called All Eyes on Shiesty dropped through 1017 Global Music and Atlantic Recording Corporation. The same label structure, the same major label partner, the same business relationship Pooh Shiesty allegedly tried to destroy at gunpoint. While he sat in federal custody with no bond and a trial date 8 months away, his music was sitting on every major streaming platform generating revenue. So check it. How does a label release an album from an artist who allegedly tried to rob them and who is currently in federal prison? Simple. Because a contract signed at gunpoint is not a valid termination. The original 1017 deal was never legally dissolved, which means the label retained every right it had under that agreement, including the right to release music recorded under the contract. The crime in that studio became a separate criminal matter. The business agreement survived it completely. Now let us talk about where the finesse truly lives. Here is the part that people need to sit with. Under a standard recording deal structure like the one Pooh Shiesty allegedly had with 1017 and Atlantic, the label owns the masters. That means Gucci Mane label owns the actual recordings, not just the license to distribute them, the recordings themselves. Every song Pooh Shiesty recorded under that contract belongs to the label catalog. That is not speculation. That is how virtually every major label deal signed by a developing artist works. And it is exactly what Pooh Shiesty was allegedly trying to claw back when he demanded full ownership of his masters and intellectual property in that pre-printed contract release. So when people say Gucci Mane owns most of Pooh Shiesty music, that is not just talk. If the original 1017 deal was structured the way most major label deals are structured, and the coerced release was legally void, then yes, 1017 controls the masters on everything Pooh Shiesty recorded under that agreement. Shiesty seasoned every feature under the label umbrella. And now, all eyes on Shiesty. That is years of catalog sitting in Gucci Mane business entity while Pooh Shiesty sits in a federal holding facility. Now let us run the actual numbers because this is where it gets real. A new artist signing to a label through a joint venture structure like 1017 and Atlantic would typically receive somewhere between 15 and 20% of net royalty income after recoupment. That sounds like a reasonable cut until you see how the math actually works. Let us say All Eyes on Shiesty generates $3 million in total royalty revenue in its first year. That sounds like a lot, but Spotify and Apple Music take roughly 30% off the top before any money reaches the label side. That immediately brings the pool down to around $2,100,000. From that, Atlantic takes their distribution and label share through the 1017 deal. A major label distribution arrangement can take anywhere from 15 to 30% of what flows through it depending on the terms. Let us say Atlantic cut brings the label side pool down to around $1,500,000. Now 1017 is working with that number. Production costs, marketing, and any other recoupable expenses the label fronted for the album come out next. Then producer points, which typically run between 3 and 5% of the master royalty per producer, get taken from the artist's royalty calculation. By the time all of that is settled, Pooh Shiesty 20% royalty is being calculated on a much smaller base than that original $3 million figure. And here is the part that really stings. If Pooh Shiesty still has an unrecouped advance balance sitting on the books from Shiesty season or any earlier deal activity, every dollar of his royalty share goes toward paying that back first before he sees a single cent. Personally, he could theoretically have a project that streams hundreds of millions of times and still walk away with nothing in his pocket until recoupment clears. That is the structure. That is how it was designed. And that is exactly what Pooh Shiesty was allegedly trying to escape when he walked into that Dallas studio. Instead, he is now locked into a contract he cannot renegotiate from a jail cell, releasing an album he cannot promote, generating revenue he may not see for years depending on his recoupment status, while Gucci Mane label collects the label side of the income and operates the machine without him. And Gucci Mane addressed the whole situation through music. In April 2026, shortly after the charges became public, he released a Zaytoven-produced track called Crash Dummy. The song became part of the public conversation around the alleged betrayal immediately. Without getting into the specific lyrics, the track is widely understood as Gucci Mane's direct response to someone using a business meeting as cover for something far more dangerous. He did not call press conferences. He did not post long statements. He dropped the record and let the federal case speak for the rest. That is the move of someone who knows exactly how to let a situation play out in his favor. Now let us zoom out for a second, because before we judge Pooh Shiesty too harshly, we need to understand the frustration that allegedly built up to this. When an artist goes from being a hungry unknown to a Billboard charting act with hundreds of millions of streams, the deal they signed at the start looks very different. You see what your music is generating. You see what other artists at your level are reportedly worth, and you look at your actual check and feel like the contract is the thing standing between you and what you have earned. That feeling is real, and it has pushed artists into lawyers' offices for decades. But every artist who has won those battles won them through legal channels, not through a Draco and a pre-printed document in a Dallas studio. Let me bring this back to where the money question actually sits with this album. When fans online ask how much Gucci Mane made off All Eyes on Shiesty, they want a number. But the honest answer is that the number depends on variables we do not have access to. What we can do is walk through a hypothetical. Imagine this album generates $5 million in total royalty qualifying revenue across its first year of streaming and sales. That $5 million does not go directly to Gucci Mane. The streaming platform keeps its margin before paying anything out. The distributor, which in this structure involves Atlantic, takes a share based on the distribution and label deal between 1017 and Atlantic. Then production costs tied to the actual recording of the album get factored in at the label level. Producer points come off the top. Publishing income flows separately through whichever publishing entity controls the underlying compositions. After all of that, whatever the contract says Pooh Shiesty receives as his royalty percentage represents his share. But that number only matters after recoupment if there is still an outstanding advance balance that needs to be recovered from royalties before the artist sees a personal check. But here is what we do know for certain. When Pooh Shiesty walked into that Dallas studio with the printed contract release and allegedly a Draco, he was betting everything on walking out a free agent with his masters, his Atlantic relationship, and full control. What he actually walked out with was a robbery charge, a kidnapping charge, a coerced signature that would never hold up in court, and an ankle monitor violation on top of it all. Pooh Shiesty did not just fail to escape his deal. He allegedly created conditions under which the label could release new music from him while he sat helpless in custody. And here is the part that makes this the ultimate finesse. He is still in the contract. The coerced release was void. The original 1017 agreement remained intact. So Pooh Shiesty is sitting in a federal facility, unable to negotiate, unable to renegotiate, unable to hire new representation and take a meeting with a competing label, and unable to do any of the things a free artist would do to improve their contractual position. He is frozen, and the label is not frozen at all. His trial is scheduled for February 2027. If convicted on federal kidnapping charges, he could be looking at decades. That means years more of his music sitting in 1017 catalog being released on the label timeline, generating revenue on the label terms, while Pooh Shiesty has zero levers to change any of it. Every year he sits in custody is another year the label retains full control over everything he recorded under that agreement, with no artist present to push back. All Eyes on Shiesty dropped on August 7, 2026, more than 6 months after January 10th. Fans showed up because his core audience is loyal and the music itself is strong. But every stream those 16 tracks generate, every dollar that flows through that pipeline, Pooh Shiesty watches from behind bars, while Gucci Mane label operates the entire machine. That is not a coincidence. That is a contract. At the end of the day, fam, this story is about something much bigger than two rappers getting into it over a contract. This is about the fundamental tension at the heart of the music industry between artists who generate the demand and the business structures that profit from it. It is about what happens when an artist feels trapped by the very deal that helped make them famous, and what happens when they choose the worst possible way to fight back. It is about leverage and who actually holds it when you strip away the fame and the streams and the social media numbers and look at what the paperwork actually says. Pooh Shiesty allegedly tried to solve a business problem in the most extreme and illegal way imaginable. And the result was that he made the underlying business problem worse while creating an entirely new legal nightmare that would define the next chapter of his life. Whatever his contract said before January 10, 2026, it said exactly the same thing after January 10th. The coerced signature did not change that. The footage of Gucci Mane saying the words did not change that. The only things that changed were Pooh Shiesty freedom, his ability to operate as an active artist, and the severity of what he is now facing in federal court. And artists can own their talent. They can own their voice, their charisma, their cultural power, and the genuine love of their fan base. But contracts determine who controls the recordings, who participates in the revenue, and who has the power to decide what happens next. Gucci Mane did not have to do anything dramatic to maintain that power in the end. He just had to survive January 10th and let the law do the rest. And right now, with All Eyes on Shiesty sitting on every streaming platform and a federal trial date scheduled for February 2027, it looks like that is exactly what happened. What are your thoughts on how this whole situation played out? Drop your take in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth breakdowns of the biggest stories in hip-hop, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a drop. We got more coming. To dig even deeper into why this entire saga hits different, you have to understand the long history of artists clashing with the very systems that elevated them. From the earliest days of the recording industry, when blues and jazz pioneers signed away their rights for next to nothing, all the way through the rock era, and into hip-hop, the pattern has repeated itself over and over. Young talent with raw hunger and street credibility steps into a major deal, thinking the advance and the distribution are the ticket out. Years later, after the streams pile up and the cultural footprint expands, that same artist looks at the statements and realizes the bulk of the money is flowing somewhere else. That realization does not always lead to measured legal strategy. Sometimes it leads to frustration boiling over in ways that destroy more than they free. Pooh Shiesty case, as alleged by prosecutors, sits at the extreme end of that spectrum. Most artists who feel underpaid hire entertainment lawyers, demand audits, push for renegotiations, or wait out the contract terms. Some walk away and rebuild independently. Very few allegedly walk into a studio with pre-printed termination papers and an AK-style weapon aiming to force the issue on the spot. The difference between those approaches is the difference between a civil dispute that might take years and a federal criminal case that can end a career and a life of freedom in one afternoon. Look at the mechanics of how a label like 1017 operates inside a major partnership with Atlantic. These joint ventures are designed so the independent brand gets cultural credibility and creative input, while the major supplies the global pipeline marketing muscle and financial infrastructure. For an artist coming out of Memphis in 2021, that structure was pure rocket fuel. Without it, Shiesty Season does not debut at number 3 on the Billboard 200. Without it, the collaborations with Dirk and 21 Savage do not reach the same volume of listeners. Without it, the streaming numbers that kept the catalog alive while Pooh Shiesty was locked up never materialize at the same scale. The very system he allegedly tried to dismantle is the same system that made the numbers he was looking at possible in the first place. That is the paradox at the center of almost every artist label dispute. The machine that feels like a cage is often the same machine that built the stage the artist is standing on. When you examine the specific demands in the alleged pre-printed release document, you see how high the stakes were in Pooh Shiesty's mind. Full ownership of masters is the holy grail for any recording artist. Masters are the actual sound recordings. Whoever owns them controls whether the music can be licensed for commercials, films, video games, or new compilations. They control the ability to remaster, re-release, or withhold the material. Publishing is the underlying songwriting rights which generate money every time the composition is performed or streamed. Transferring Atlantic approval rights to the artist's sole discretion would have effectively cut 1017 out of the decision-making on future releases and partnerships. In other words, the paperwork allegedly presented that day was not a request for better terms. It was a demand for total independence packaged as a termination agreement. When Gucci Mane allegedly refused to sign under those conditions, the situation escalated, according to the government, into armed coercion, video recording, and robbery of the other parties present. That escalation is what turned a potential civil fight into a federal kidnapping and robbery case carrying life exposure. The cooperation angle is where street culture and federal procedure collide hardest. In many communities, the idea of talking to law enforcement after a robbery is seen as crossing a line. In the federal system, a victim who provides detailed statements, video evidence, and timeline information is simply participating in the investigation of a violent crime committed against them. Gucci Mane's status as a high-profile figure with established legal representation and resources meant the government had a cooperative witness who could help lock down the narrative early. Combined with the GPS data from the ankle monitor, the license plate reader hits, the rental records, and the social media posts of stolen items, the case assembled quickly. By the time arrests rolled out in late March and early April 2026, the evidence package was substantial enough for the judge to deny bond for Pooh Shiesty, citing the strength of the case, his prior record, and the previous home confinement violation. Big 30 received bond. Pooh Shiesty did not. That distinction alone shows how the court viewed the relative roles and risk levels. From a pure business perspective, the survival of the original contract is the quiet power move that keeps generating returns. Because the coerced document is legally void, the masters remain with 1017. The right to schedule and release new material recorded under the deal remains with 1017. The royalty structure, the recoupment balance, and the distribution partnership with Atlantic all continue as if the Dallas studio incident never happened on the business side. On the criminal side, the incident became the foundation of a multi-defendant federal case. That separation of the criminal matter from the contractual rights is what allows an album like All Eyes on Shiesty to appear on every major platform while the artist sits in custody, unable to promote it, unable to renegotiate, unable to shop for a new deal. The catalog keeps working, the streams keep counting, the revenue keeps flowing according to the original terms. The artist who allegedly tried to seize control ends up with less control than he started with. consider the hypothetical revenue scenarios more carefully. Whether the first-year number is 3 million or 5 million, the waterfall of deductions is the same. Streaming platforms take their percentage first. Distribution and major label shares come next. Marketing and production costs that were advanced by the label are recouped. Producer points are deducted from the artist's side. Management commissions, if any, are taken from the artist's net. Only after all of that does the contractual royalty percentage apply, and even then it applies against any remaining unrecouped balance. An artist can have a genuine hit project and still receive zero personal royalty checks for years if the advance ledger is deep enough. That structural reality is what fuels the resentment that sometimes leads artists to extreme measures. The resentment is understandable. The method alleged in the federal complaint is not. History is full of artists who felt the same squeeze and still found ways to fight through audits, lawsuits, renegotiations, or by waiting out the term and walking free with their next phase intact. The alleged Dallas approach traded a civil problem for a criminal one, and in the process handed the other side both the legal high ground and continued ownership of the catalog. Gucci Mane's decision to address the situation through a Zaytoven-produced record rather than a press conference or lengthy social media statement fits a long pattern in his career. He has always preferred to let the music and the results speak. Crash Dummy dropped into a climate already thick with public discussion of the charges. Listeners immediately connected the dots. The move reinforced the image of someone who understands leverage and timing. He did not need to litigate the case in the court of public opinion. The federal filings and the subsequent arrests did that work. Meanwhile, the business side continued operating. The August 2026 release of All Eyes on Shiesty demonstrated in real time that the original agreement still controlled the music. Fans who streamed the project were participating in the very pipeline Pooh Shiesty allegedly tried to seize, and the revenue continued to move according to terms he no longer had the freedom to challenge. Zooming further out, the story reflects a broader tension that has defined hip-hop business for decades. Artists generate the culture, the language, the energy, and the demand. Labels and distributors supply the infrastructure that turns that culture into global-scale revenue. When the split feels unfair, the artist feels trapped. When the artist tries to break free through force instead of process, the trap only tightens. Pooh Shiesty case, as laid out by prosecutors, is an extreme illustration of that dynamic. The same infrastructure that amplified his voice and kept his catalog alive during his previous incarceration is now the infrastructure that continues to monetize his recordings while he sits in federal custody awaiting trial. The original 2021 deal that once looked like opportunity now functions as the mechanism that keeps the music moving without him. The coerced signature changed nothing about those rights. The video statement changed nothing. The only things that changed were his physical freedom, his ability to operate as an active artist, and the seriousness of the charges hanging over the next years of his life. In the end, the power did not shift because of any new negotiation or public campaign. It stayed exactly where the original paperwork put it. Gucci Mane in 1017 simply had to survive the January 10th meeting and allow the legal system to run its course. With the album already in the marketplace and the trial set for February 2027, the practical reality is clear. The music is still under the label control. The revenue is still flowing through the established channels. And the artist who allegedly tried to rewrite the terms at gunpoint is watching from a position where he can neither renegotiate nor walk away. That is the full circle. That is the finesse. And that is why this story continues to resonate far beyond the two names at the center of it.